Thank you, Dorianne. And thank you to the Brockton Writers Series team for inviting me, and to all of you, of course, for coming out on this. Thank you for coming out on this rather chilly January evening. I'm going to read from the opening of Sisters of the Spruce, a novel inspired by my grandmother's vivid tales about growing up on the Queen Charlotte Islands, now called Haida Gwaii. Although she lived there with her family in the 1920s, I chose to set my novel a few years earlier at the end of World War I, when these remote islands in northern BC were first being opened up to the world due to the Allies' campaign to acquire Sitka spruces for their fighter planes. The logging labor force was largely Asian and Indigenous, as well as white. In these opening pages that I'll read, the 14-year-old heroine, loosely based on my grandmother, arrives on these islands with her two sisters as night is falling. Over the course of the novel, dark adventures will befall them, including seduction, unwanted pregnancy, and sexual violence. It was late by the time we got there. The sky had turned into a large shadow, which crept this way and that and threatened to become all I could see. But animal alertness was keeping my brain bright awake, my limbs restless. It made no difference that Dad kept telling me to sit still. My legs dangled off the pier. There I sat, nestled between my two sisters, as we all waited for whoever was supposed to be coming, our eyes fastened on the glistening black water. Early that morning, from the deck of a steamship, I'd watched everything receding and shrinking. The cluster of clapboard houses, the store, the saloon, the white cross of the church. Fare thee well, Prince Rupert. As I looked back at the town, icy spray settled on my cheeks, and it all flattened into a thin gray line and vanished completely. Then there was nothing except choppy waves, capped with white foam. The roar of the engine filled my body. On the ship, time juttered by. I went inside. I came out again. In, out. I'd been in this position before. Salt shower making me hoarse. Wobbliness in the gut from nothing solid to stand upon. But somehow it was worse this time around. We were starting all over again, once again. This time we didn't even know where we were going. My eyes stared out at the colorless waters, cresting and breaking with a force that came from someplace invisible, relentless. The feeling had become all too familiar in recent years. At some point, May came to join me on the deck and grabbed at my palm. Warmth from her hand flowed welcomingly into my body. It'll be nice there, won't it? Her voice faded in the wind. Yes, nice, very nice, I think. I tried to sound confident, but what did I know, really? We'll live in a real house again, not a basement. I looked down at May's petal-like face and nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In Prince Rupert, Dad had been a janitor at a down-at-heel hotel, in exchange for which we'd been granted a couple rooms in the basement. It had been a sad existence compared to our lives before in a bustling mill town called Skeena. How frightened my sister appeared, barely daring to hope. She was only 7. I adored her, and she expected me to be her big sister, so I forced a smile. We'll get a lovely house again with a large front porch. What will Oto-san do for work? Although May spoke less Japanese than me, what few words she did have, Oto-san, Okasan, she clung on to fiercely. Dad will log and fish again, and you'll play in the forest every day, and everything will be just as it used to be. You wait and see, but no more questions for now, all right? She went inside while I watched an albatross get flung across the sky like a tattered flag. Nausea, fierce as an earthquake, came in spells that shook the walls of my stomach. Toward the end of the journey, it got worse than ever. The water suddenly all a-swirl, as though a great fist were pulling us downward toward our seabed graves. Then the fist released us, the waters calmed, and the seagulls, always the seagulls. You knew you were getting close to port when the flocks of gulls descended, swooping down so low that if you dared to stand outside, you had to protect your head. And then a harbor came into focus. Canoes lined the beach, boulders rising high behind. The clouds were streaked with moody violet, their upside-down images reflected upon the glassy surface. It was the last and only stop. The few other travelers were getting off, so we did too. We watched their backs shrink away from us, blurring into small dots in the distance. How I envied them for having purpose in their gaits, clear destination. As we sat on the edge of the wharf, the sky darkened, engulfing us in shadows. At last, the wood slats vibrated. A thin fellow with a weedy mustache and not much hair was approaching with a stiff wave. He was dressed in an old, crumpled overcoat and mud-spattered trousers. Without saying anything, it was clear that he was here on behalf of the company. Mr. Brown, he said his name was. We'd have to walk to the Indian village, he said. Without asking any questions, Dad began to follow him along the beach under the last ribbons of dim light. And so we made our way too, me behind Dad, Mum and my sisters straggling at the line's end. All our worldly possessions were in the bags we carried. In the distance, a smattering of bleached-out houses could be seen blurrily on the shoreline, and a single totem pole shot up, like a wave of a skinny arm. Mr. Brown led us to the largest house, which had a long veranda, newly painted white. He told us to wait out front while he went inside. A few minutes later, he came out with a tall Indian man who, except for his caramel skin tone, didn't much look like an Indian at all. He was dressed in a fine dark jacket with a matching vest beneath, the silver chain of a pocket watch secured to one of the buttonholes. His hair and mustache were more tidily groomed than Mr. Brown's. Apparently, this fellow owned a boat and was going to be our skipper for the rest of the journey, down the strait into the inlet. They haggled. It seemed the price had gone up since last month. And there were more people in our family than expected. And we were late. It wasn't going to be easy to navigate in the dark, now was it? While the Indian stood his ground, Mr. Brown got all blustery and red in the face and threatened to leave us all there. The Indian remained unperturbed and said we were welcome to camp on the beach. Bees abuzz in my gut, I looked over at Dad expectantly, but he appeared pretty powerless. Back hunched, his eyes did not stray from his feet. Mercifully, Mr. Brown relented and thrust over a fistful of cash. We followed our skipper down to the water's edge. His boat was a small schooner with white sails that caught the wind easily and, like giant moth wings, carried us along the current. The feeling thrilled me while at the same time unsettling my stomach, the black forest on both sides getting even blacker as the sky turned to somber flatness. The trees were higher out here than any I'd seen before, their trunks thicker too. They formed a fortress around us, a fortress topped by daggers or pointy teeth. Mr. Brown's face relaxed a little. You folks do speak English, I assume. Of course we spoke English. Why else would the company have hired us? Of all the yellow men in this part of the world, you wouldn't find anyone who spoke finer English than my father. Yes, sir, Dad said. I even taught language class back in Japan. You're pulling my leg now. Mr. Brown shook his head, his eyes brimming with curiosity. When did you move here? Over 20 years ago, if you can believe it. My father smiled, more a smile of exhaustion than pride. His hair was thinning, the cobwebby lines beneath his eyes more apparent than ever. Too many sweaty days under the northern sun had left their marks on him. What about your wife? She speak English? His chin wagged toward my mother, seated beside me. Yes, well, some English anyway. Then why ain't she answering for herself? Cat got her tongue? I watched the back of Mum's head, her glossy hair still neatly swept up in a bun, barely a strand loose, even after so many hours of travel. The white ruffles of her high-neck blouse peeked above the gray shawl. She'd wanted to wear her best clothes to make a good impression on the company. We'd been under the impression that the company consisted of some very important, very rich white men, not this slouchy guy who smelled of tobacco and last month's laundry. I gave my mother a gentle nudge. Yes, yes. This came out as barely a whisper from her lips in Japanese. So she ain't mute after all. Mr. Brown laughed, a drop of spittle flying. Don't really matter, though. Don't need to speak in order to cook and clean. My wife is indeed an excellent cook. The boat began to rock. We were passing a drift log spit and a desolate beach where an old canoe had been left on its side to rot. Your name's Sam Tarata, said Mr. Brown. Sam's not a Japanese name, though. Well, it's Sanosuke, really, but people have been calling me Sam for years. You're one of Will Henderson's guys, correct? Yes, sir, Dad said. You met Will back in Skeena. That's right. Will says you can be relied on. Not that Skeena's an example for anything, make no mistake. Skeena had gone belly up. It still upset me to think about all my family had lost there, the consequence being we'd had to move to ugly Prince Rupert. It had been 3 years since we'd left Skeena when the American company that had owned the mill had pulled out. I wondered if this man had lost big money in the venture too, but then he smiled, a reckless, fast smile, shaking off his mood. We're here now, my friend. That's what matters, right? And there's plenty of work to be done taking down these beauties. He gestured at the shore, at the molasses shadows. The government's pouring money into it, big money. Did Will tell you the news? Dad gave a small smile while remaining quiet, attentive, like he didn't want to deprive Mr. Brown of the chance to gab on about something that clearly delighted him. These Sitka spruce here on the Charlottes are the only trees in the entire British Empire strong enough to build our fighter planes from. Their wood refuses to splinter, even under a shower of goddamn bullets. So everybody's counting on us now. Thank you.